Hello, welcome to Poetry Lockdown Day 87. I'm bringing you some Herman Melville today. If you're a reader, especially of 19th century American literature, you probably know what Herman Melville is most famous for, Moby Dick. It's a great novel, but a lot of people don't know that Melville was also a terrific poet. And like another poet that I referenced earlier in this lockdown video series, Walt Whitman, he composed a number of poems, in fact, a collection during the American Civil War. And one of the things I've been thinking about, over the last really couple weeks, but longer than that, for most of the lockdown is, how do poets come to terms with overwhelming events that are happening right in their own backyard and in the moment. So Melville wrote this poem called "The Housetops." I'm sorry, Housetop, and it definitely helps to have a little historical background. So, right from the top, you can see it was written July 1863. Obviously, the American Civil War is happening right at that moment. At this time, um, President Lincoln has given the Emancipation Proclamation, but in New York, and he's also needing troops for the Northern Army. But in New York, a lot of the men are really upset, right? And they're actually kind of resentful. Many are resentful of the Emancipation Proclamation because they feel like they're going to lose their jobs to freed blacks. And so there are riots in the streets, and African Americans are the target of the violence, of much of the violence. And so that is really the backdrop for this poem, The Housetop, in which the speaker, who, we can definitely picture as Melville, is actually witnessing what's happening in New York City. So with that introduction, and if I misrepresented any history, like I also provided a link there to history.com, which has a nice backdrop of the poem. The Housetop by Herman Melville, a night piece, July 1863. No sleep. The sultriness pervades the air and binds the brain. A dense oppression, such as tawny tigers feel in matted shades, vexing their blood and making apt for ravage. Beneath the stars, the roofy desert spreads vacant as Libya. All is hushed nearby. Yet fitfully from far breaks a mixed surf of muffled sound, the atheist roar of riot. Yonder, where parching Sirius set in drought balefully glares red Arson, there and there. The town is taken by its rats, ship rats, and rats of the wharves. All civil charms and priestly spells which late held hearts in awe, fear bound, subjected to a better sway than sway of self, these like a dream dissolve, and man rebounds whole æons back in nature. Hail to the low dull rumble, dull and dead, and ponderous drag that shakes the wall. Wise Draco comes deep in the midnight roll of black artillery. He comes, though late, in code corroborating Calvin's creed and cynic tyrannies of honest kings. He comes, nor parleys, and the town redeemed gives thanks devout, nor being thankful heeds the grimy slur on the Republic's faith implied, which holds that man is naturally good, and more is nature's Roman, never to be scourged. This is a complex poem, and I definitely read and reread it a number of times to make sense of it. But I've thought a lot when I've talked about these poetry lockdowns about sort of turning points or shifts in the poem. And to me, it really comes at the moment when the authorities, and here I think it is probably the army, I don't know for that for a fact, but when it says wise Draco comes, I think it's military forces. I don't know if that's a New York City police force. Maybe it is. But that's, I think, Draco, the lawgiver. That's a Greek allusion. And it seems to me, right, this is kind of like an ambiguity in the poem in which Melville is in some sense grateful. The riots have been put down, but in another sense, right, the fact that this is really saying, right, man is not naturally good. It's giving the lie to that phrase. Um, and I'm really moved by the last line because African Americans are not mentioned in the poem itself, but the fact that the violence is happening against African Americans to me is alluded to in that last line, which brings to mind the lash. Man is naturally good, and more is nature's Roman, never to be scourged. Um, to me, this poem is frighteningly resonant in this moment when we're having these conversations about law enforcement and what that means. And to me, this poem imagines that man is naturally good, and what might it mean to reimagine what law enforcement is. To me, that's what this poem suggests. I know lots of people probably read it in lots of different ways, um, but I really appreciate Melville's willingness to sit in ambiguity. If you like this poem, another really challenging and at times frightening story, or really novella, is Benito Cereno. I won't get into that whole story, but if you feel like you're interested in this kind of work, I'd really recommend that novella. Thanks for bearing with me. I'm going to read just the last 8 to 9 lines because I feel like they really sum up the heart of this poem for me, and it's at the turning point. Wise Draco comes deep in the midnight roll of black artillery. He comes, though late, in code corroborating Calvin's creed and cynic tyrannies of honest kings. He comes, nor parleys in the town redeemed, gives thanks devout, nor being thankful heeds the grimy slur on the republic's faith implied, which holds that man is naturally good, and more is nature's Roman, never to be scourged. Thank you, Herman Melville, for this poem, and thank you all for tuning in.